The White House says the Biden administration is in the final stages of preparing what could be the last and final aid package for Ukraine. With the proposed aid package currently stuck in U.S. Congress, Western intelligence agencies are now calculating how long Ukraine will be able to hold up without the help of Washington. Let's turn to Professor Robert English for more. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Professor English, a U.S. defense official said Ukraine may lose the war around next summer if military aid from the U.S. and EU is no longer provided. Why is it that it's next summer?
It's impossible to say. I think that was a kind of arbitrary date. And of course, it all depends on your definition of winning or losing, right? Ukraine, if your definition of winning is successfully fighting off a Russian invasion and keeping most of the country intact, then Ukraine has already won and defeated Russia's greater power. If your definition, however, is the complete liberation, including Crimea, of all occupied territory, then Ukraine hasn't and probably never will win. It will probably have to be some kind of compromise settlement. That's becoming clear to everyone. And the date of 6 months from now simply means yes, if military aid is halted, Ukrainian capabilities to defend will slowly degrade, but nobody can say whether it'll be 1 month or 3 months before Russia scores more advances. There's no magic attached to next summer or 6 months.
I see. Now, I want to point out what the IMF chief said in an interview over the weekend. Now, she said that delays in providing extra funding would jeopardize Kyiv's tentative economic recovery. That's exactly what she said, right?
Yeah, and this may be actually more important at this point because Ukraine has lots of weapons, but it's running short of ammunition for some of them, and it's running short of manpower. And the manpower is very much connected with the state of the economy. Ukraine's economy is in a shattered condition. It shrank by 30% last year. It's seen a teeny bit of growth, but I wouldn't really call it a recovery, and Ukraine remains wholly dependent on foreign aid. As that aid is held up, look at the Hungarians refusing to support several billions that Ukraine needs. And as that aid is held up, it makes the social situation, not just the economic situation, but the social strains in that damaged and poverty-stricken country much worse. And that in turn will impact the availability of manpower. Right? Look how many young men are trying to flee the country or avoid military service. Look how many families are trying to hide them. They need those men at home. They're afraid they'll just be slaughtered. It's all connected to the economy and Ukraine's larger prospects. So I think that's a good point from the IMF director, that it's the economic aid that really must not be interrupted right now.
Right, quite daunting situations on both social and economic levels. Now, that's why Ukraine leader Volodymyr Zelensky made another visit to D.C. last week to make a plea himself. But that turned out to be quite a failure, I have to say. Now, if the U.S. manages to push through the military aid package early, let's say next week, would that change things for Ukraine? What do you think?
Nothing drastic is going to change over the next few weeks, and I think everyone knows that. There's some alarm bells being sounded because they're trying to apply pressure. But if this impasse between the president and the Republicans in Congress is resolved with some kind of compromise over immigration issues in the next 2-3 weeks, right, early in the new year, that will be fine, right? Ukraine is not on the verge of running out of anything exactly now. But it does need some assurance that there will be more ammunition, more munitions coming. And again, especially from the European side, it needs that economic aid to keep the economy afloat. I repeat, if the economy collapses and we have just sort of socio-political chaos, then that will undermine everything. And so I think the economic aid right now that's being delayed is actually more worrisome than the next round of shells for artillery.
Professor English, the thing is, there are voices of concern that the collapse of Ukraine may mean a security challenge and threats for the entire Europe. Now, those concerns could probably push the U.S. and the EU to provide much-needed military support, right?
I don't know. Right now, there are lots of holdouts in both Europe, the European Union, and the U.S. And those threats, the worry that Russia could go further, have been there all along. And in fact, I think a lot of military analysts would say that right now Russia is expending thousands of men and hundreds of tanks and other armored vehicles just to advance a few hundred meters here and a few kilometers there. The threat to invade a European country is so distant that it's really not credible. And I think that's a bit of hyperbole on the part of President Biden and on the part of the director of NATO, right, Jens Stoltenberg. That's a bit of hyperbole on their part to try to get that aid unfrozen. But most serious analysts know that nothing is going to collapse tomorrow, that Russia is not going to invade Poland or the Baltic republics anytime in the next decade. So it's just pressure to get that aid unstuck. Both sides are playing the PR game, right? We can see that.
Right. Well, what's for sure is the military picture for Ukraine is quite bleak at the moment. Professor English, what's your outlook on the Ukraine crisis? Do you also think next summer may be a pivotal point for Ukraine? I know it's not next summer, but...
Yeah. The picture is bleak. It's bleak if you hope and expect a complete Ukrainian victory. It's become clear that that's just not going to happen, even if there is a renewal of aid. Remember that more ammunition would be great to hold the line. But on some scores, on some measures, Ukraine will never outdo Russia. Russia simply has far more men that it can throw into combat. Russia has factories churning out artillery shells at a rate several times higher than all the combined production of the West. Russia has pioneered new missiles, electronic warfare systems, and drones that the West can't even keep up with. So there's no realistic prospect of another counteroffensive next summer, only one that would be even more successful, right? All of the indicators are that Ukraine will be in a weaker position against Russia. Holding the line is one thing, sure, that Russia can be kept at bay and Ukraine can maintain its territorial integrity on the land it now controls. But nobody believes that somehow the next counteroffensive will be more successful than the last, because in every possible measure, Ukraine will be further behind Russia, not further ahead. So it's not a good picture.
Right. That's why it's so impressive that Ukraine has held up this much into the war. Professor English, thanks so much for staying up so late to join us this morning. We appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.